Welcome to our Sunday service. My name is Reverend Kate Dean and I am proud to serve as the minister for Rosslyn Hill Chapel, a Unitarian spiritual community here in Hampstead in North London. It is a spiritual home for open minds. Our theme for June is compassion, and today we will reflect on compassion and self-care. Some of us will be struggling with living in this time of pandemic, and our hearts ache when we witness the terrifying situation in the US at the moment, following the brutal act of racist violence which led to the death of George Floyd, the latest of so many tragedies. We Unitarians recognise that we are part of an interconnected web of existence, and we stand for equality for all. But we also recognise that although some Unitarians were vocal about the abolishment of slavery and worked hard to win equal rights for women, for ethnic minorities and for gay people, the uncomfortable truth is that there have also been people with racist attitudes in our past. We need to accept that our Unitarian history is not spotless. But we do what we can, and we must stand up to injustice whenever we see it, and lift up the voices of those who have been forced to be silent in the past. I'd like to share with you a reading from Adam Lawrence Dyer, an African-American and Unitarian Universalist. It reminds me of times when I have felt like the only non-white person in the village, and then spotted another person of colour. For me, it was a quick smile between us. For Adam, it was the nod. You've seen it. Two black men pass each other on the street. They nod. Subtle, sometimes imperceptible, but there is acknowledgement. Do you know him? No. Yes. No. I learnt this from my father and my grandfather and my other grandfather and my uncle and my great-uncle and from every other black man in my early life. Once, as a teenager, I didn't do it. I was verbally accosted from behind. Don't you ever forget, I'm all you've got. I've never forgotten since. These days it gets harder. I walk through places where armies of broken black men inhabit the corners and wander aimlessly and beaten. When I cross their paths, I look for that acknowledgement, the one that says, we are valid, we are real, we have a place, we have a family. You're all I've got. When it doesn't come, obscured by drugs and desperation, or more often just trying to live as part of this grand experience called America, pressed down, shot at, torn apart, stolen from, talked about and not to, criminalised and caricatured, part of me dies inside. The young brother passes without it. It is generational too. Fewer and fewer young people making this contact. I wonder if they really feel safe, so safe that they don't need this kind of community. Not just with skin colour, but feeling no need to recognise each other for any reason. Maybe they are afraid because they see me as the unknown. My God, we don't recognise each other. Maybe we aren't teaching them that the struggle isn't over, that time hasn't healed a wound that opens over and over again. That this simple acknowledgement, nod, was once all we had, and still, like it or not, may be all we've got. I now light our chalice, the symbol of our liberal religious faith. May this light be as the light of knowledge in our minds and the warmth of love in our hearts. At this point, we would usually turn to greet our neighbour, and if you are watching with other people, you might like to just check in with them briefly with a nod or a smile or even a hug if you're together in a family. And if you're watching this alone, please know that we are with you and we're sending our loving kindness to you. At this time, we recognise that we also have joys and concerns that we would love to share. And perhaps you can light a candle or a candle in your mind to think of the joys and concerns in your heart and in all the hearts of the people who are watching today. We continue with our virtual collection plate, and so if you would like to make a donation, we are always very grateful for any contributions. You can do this via the donate button on our website or our Just Giving page, and you should be able to see those details now. Now let us sing our hymn.
Sing,
Our Children's Chapel coordinator, Katie, has been busy making another session for us, and so you can watch that as a separate video on our YouTube channel. Now I'd like to offer you a story for all ages from the Buddhist tradition. It's called How the Birds Became Friends, and it's one of my favourites. Now you may not know this, but long ago the birds were not friends. Each time a bird would meet another bird, he would say, "I am better than you are." And the other bird would say, "No, I'm better than you are." And then they would start arguing, and they might even start fighting as well. Well, one day, Mr. Tail was flapping along, and then he encountered Mr. Wing. And as you can see, Mr. Tail's got beautiful colours in his tail, and Mr. Wing has got beautiful colours on his wings. Now, Mr. Tail was really not in the mood for an argument, and so instead he said to Mr. Wing, "Mr. Wing, I think that you are better than I am." And Mr. Wing was a bit taken aback. He'd never heard another bird say something like that. And so, sort of to be polite, he said, "Oh no, Mr. Tail, I think you are the better bird." And so in this way they got talking, and they were comparing the beautiful colours and their tails and their wing feathers. And they were discussing the different foods that they liked, and they became friends, and they decided that they would live in the big tree together. Now one day Mr. Wing had flown off to do some kind of bird business, and all the birds came up to Mr. Tail and said, "Why are you friends with that horrible, awful Mr. Wing? We can't understand it." And Mr. Tail said, "Oh, don't be so nasty about Mr. Wing. I really like him, and do you know, he is so kind. He has let me live in his tree with him." And then the next day, Mr. Tail had flown off, and Mr. Wing was pottering around in his tree, and the birds came up to him and said, "Mr. Wing, why are you friends with that awful Mr. Tail?" And Mr. Wing said, "Oh, please don't be nasty about my friend. Do you know, he is so kind. He has let me live in his tree with him." And so after that, the birds realised, gosh, maybe we do have things in common and we can be kind to each other. And that's how all of the birds became friends. Let us gather in prayer. Loving God, we pause in the stillness to rest for a moment, to quiet ourselves, so that we can feel what stirs within us. Each breath draws us closer to the pulse of life, and with each exhalation we make room for something new. May we find in this gathering the comfort of those who care. May we encounter patience along our growing edges and compassion in our most tender spots. Here may we find the inspiration and encouragement we need to face our challenges and nurture ourselves. And in the presence of suffering across the globe, may we redouble our efforts to practice kindness where we are, with the hope that the light of our actions travels like the light of faraway stars. May our gestures of compassion and generosity seed possibility. May we travel humbly with one another, choosing reconciliation over resentment as we try to live right-sized. When life presses in and shifts us off balance, when pain assails us, when frustration mounts, may the rhythm of our breath steady us and bring us back to a place of gratitude. Blessed be, and Amen. What if you thought of it as the Jews consider the Sabbath, the most sacred of times? Cease from travel. Cease from buying and selling. Give up, just for now, on trying to make the world different than it is. Sing, pray, touch only those to whom you commit your life. Centre down. And when your body has become still, reach out with your heart. Know that we are connected in ways that are terrifying and beautiful. You could hardly deny it now. Know that our lives are in one another's hands. Surely that has become clear. Do not reach out your hands. Reach out your heart. Reach out your words. Reach out all the tendrils of compassion that move invisibly where we cannot touch. Promise this world your love, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, so long as we shall live. The time will come when, with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, "Sit here, eat." You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit, feast on your life. This Sunday would have been our annual anniversary service to mark the first gathering for worship in our current chapel building nearly 160 years ago. In the past, we've had guest speakers, perhaps our chapel choir or visiting musicians, and even a ballet dancer or two from the dance school that uses the chapel's hall. But of course, we can't even meet in our beautiful chapel at the moment. Instead of joyful celebration, we have many sorrows and concerns held in our hearts. Instead of thinking about our chapel community, we are thinking about ourselves and our loved ones. And perhaps that's where we need to be right now, in our hearts and in our homes. In this time of pandemic, some of us now have extra time to care for ourselves, but others find that our time is taken up caring for or being concerned about other people. There is a risk that when we give of ourselves too much, we can end up burned out and unable to even help ourselves, let alone other people. Caring for ourselves is essential if we are to be strong enough to practice compassionate action for those who are in need. Before we were old enough to name it, we probably learned about being kind to someone else, especially if they were suffering. Later on, we learned the word for it, compassion. Part of belonging to a spiritual community is entering into a connection with a compassionate group of individuals. But it's not always the case if our ability to care is stretched to its limit. Despite our best intentions, it can be easy to succumb to compassion fatigue. It's been wonderful to see the number of people signing up as volunteers to help others during this current crisis. But even offering help can have its own challenges, especially when you know that there is a need, but for whatever reason, you're not able to give in the way that you'd like. The golden rule, found in so many of the world's religions and philosophies, essentially states that one must love thy neighbour as thyself, treat others as you would wish to be treated. But it has to start with thyself, myself. Otherwise, you won't have the capacity to love others. It only works if we treat ourselves well, accepting ourselves as we are, learning to love the person we see in the mirror, and that is the first step to self-compassion and will enable us to love not only ourselves but care for others as well. The writer and theologian Karen Armstrong brought together religious leaders and philosophers from around the world to create the Charter for Compassion based on the Golden Rule, a call to the world to treat each other with more kindness. In her book, 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life, Armstrong writes that unless we embrace our own shortcomings, it's difficult for us to accept negative aspects of other people. Many of us will know the famous reading from Corinthians, which begins, "Love is patient, love is kind." Yes, love is patient and love is kind. But that doesn't mean that we always have to be patient and kind all of the time. We should accept our shortcomings. Love is something that moves through us with the divine, and all of our emotions, fear, anger, joy and sorrow, are what make us perfectly imperfect human beings. Self-care has become a bit of a buzzword recently, and I think this is for a good reason, because people have realised its importance. Some people use the analogy of the flight safety card, always fit your oxygen mask before helping other people with theirs. And it's always better to keep those oxygen tanks topped up and ready for when we need them. Self-care in an emergency is already too late. If we give too much without attending to our own needs, we can find we've forgotten who we really are. We need the moment that Derek Walcott describes when you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, "Sit here, Eat. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Self-care is about balancing the different aspects of our lives, how we think, feel and behave. Tending to our mind, body and spirit is especially important if we have any hope in helping others. And any work which is physically and emotionally draining requires extra emphasis on self-care to ensure that we don't get burnt out. The Smithsonian Museum of African American History has produced resources to encourage greater anti-racism action, and they recognise that this work can come at a price. They state, "We each bring our own beliefs, experiences and feelings to our anti-racist work, a work that is difficult and demanding. Our ongoing commitment to actively think about and take action against racism, combined with a sense of urgency and deep caring, adds pressure and stress to our daily lives. The emotional impact of this work is real. Therefore, it is vital that we all practice self-care to benefit our overall health and quality of life." Over the years, many of the caring professionals have built systems of supervision and support which recognise that the work takes its toll. But for activists and volunteers, this kind of support is not always obvious or forthcoming, even though it is still essential. At a time when all kinds of grassroots activities are springing up, the need for people to support themselves through self-care becomes even more necessary. Although the phrase "we're in it together" has been used often when referring to the lockdown within this time of pandemic, it's only half true. Yes, a great number of us have had our movements restricted, but our experiences of this can be very different. For some, they have found unexpected extra time to do things they've always wanted to do, and it can be relaxing. Others are anxious about their health or finance. Others still seem busier than ever, juggling work from home with other responsibilities, such as caring for vulnerable relatives or homeschooling their children. Equally, there may be people who want to help, those whose hearts ache to be of use, and yet not be in a position to do so for whatever reason, and this brings its own tensions and disappointments. Global suffering doesn't make our feelings of fear or inadequacy any less real. In fact, it may even magnify them. And so it's not surprising if we feel exhausted just at the thought of it all. So, how do we do it? Dig where the ground is soft, as the Chinese proverb goes. Find what is willing to change. Start by working with what is easiest in order to make progress. Here's a little exercise that we can all do in a quiet moment. If you had to give yourself a score out of 10 for each of these areas, how would you fare? Physical, psychological, emotional, spiritual, personal, professional. What are the areas where you need to improve? Take a moment to consider this. Where would you put your lower scores and your higher scores? And what are the ways in which you could improve? Self-care isn't just about bubble baths and hot chocolate, although they are both lovely and can certainly help some people to feel better. There are all kinds of lists and suggestions on the internet for different ways that you can practice self-care. But you will have your own unique map of what works for you. Here are a few suggestions. Physical. Taking care of our body through eating well and getting some exercise. Spiritual. Checking in with where we are on our path and what might help us to progress. Emotional. taking a few calm, deep breaths before rushing into a situation. The key is to consider that this is self-maintenance, as you would maintain a car or a bike. Don't wait until you're burnt out. A few small steps early on will save greater efforts later on. Think of a few simple ways to keep that healthy balance in the good times so that you can be prepared for more challenges in the future. And when is the best time to put your self-care plan into action? As soon as possible, as far as I'm concerned. How about right now? And so I offer a guided meditation to start us off, inspired by the words from our first reading by Reverend Lynn Ungar. So let's begin by sitting in a comfortable position. You might want to plant your feet firmly on the ground, your connection to the earth. And close your eyes or soften your gaze as we begin with a few deep, calm breaths, in and out. Noticing the cool air as you breathe in, how it is warmed by your body, and the warm air as you breathe out. Take some time now to reflect on these words. When your body has become still, reach out into your heart. Reach out all the tendrils of compassion that move invisibly where we cannot touch. May we find small ways to care for ourselves as well as for each other. Let us reflect on the small steps that we may take, those first small baby steps. You may like to pause the video now to continue to reflect. And when you are ready, gently open your eyes and join me. Well, practicing what I preach, I think my next step might be a short nap after I finish filming this service. Blessings on all of us, and Amen. We return to the words of Reverend Leif Seligman for our closing blessing. May we find the comfort of those who care. May we encounter compassion in our most tender spots. May we find the inspiration and encouragement that we need to face our challenges and nurture ourselves. Blessed be, and Amen.